Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Despite advancements in healthcare, a growing number of people are experiencing worsening health issues. This is a trend observable across various demographics, marked by a rise in chronic illness. What's going on? Could it be that someone or something doesn't want us well? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone TV channel, xztv.ca. This hour, Dr. Michelle Gamble is joining us to analyze healthcare options and possible resistance to them. Dr. Gamble is the co-founder and director of ITAV Ministry, Inc. and Sankofa Healing and Enrichment, Inc. She's the author of Creating a Happier, Healthier You, educator, mentor, and speaker who specializes in assisting persons with chronic illness to transform their health. Dr. Gamble has been a professional educator for over 25 years and a healthcare provider for over 20. She has a bachelor's in mathematics and English with an emphasis on secondary school education, a master's and doctorate in naturology. Dr. Gamble is a board-certified alternative healthcare provider with advanced training and certification in various areas of health. Her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. Dr. Gamble, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It is wonderful to be here with your community.
It's great to have you. So your bio states you have a master's and a doctorate in naturology. What is naturology?
That's a very good question. Naturology is actually the study of nature's cures. Several years ago, when we go back to the early 1900s, there was a significant coup, I guess you can say, of the healthcare paradigm in our country. It was basically taken over by special interests, corporate interests, oil tycoons, and things of that nature. When that occurred, they basically pushed out the previous natural healing modalities to replace it with a new type of institution, which emphasized the importance of pharmaceuticals that were derived from chemical byproducts. And so when I went into the field of study, I first started out, interestingly enough, thinking that I wanted to go into medicine because my family members have been nurses. And I thought, okay, I'll go in and I'll be a doctor. And then when I went into my first semester, I said, nah, this is not me. Because what I realized is that I did not believe in pharmaceuticals. I really believe in nature's cures. And at that time, there was the choices of going into what's called naturopathy, which is basically the study of utilizing some modalities of nature, but really within the same medical context, or going into naturology. And a lot of the old schools like Clayton Institute of Healing, American Institute of Holistic Healing, all of these different institutions that were based on herbalism and things of that nature have been pushed out of the healthcare modality through a lot of interesting politics and shenanigans. But in any case, that's a long roundabout answer to your question.
So you're a board certified alternative healthcare practitioner. Are you also a medical doctor?
Absolutely not. I am not a medical doctor. I do not diagnose, cure, or treat disease. It's actually contrary to my entire paradigm of how I help people to heal themselves. And so a lot of times people think that I say these various things as a way of getting around the legality of different things. But in reality, I have no desire to diagnose, treat, or cure any type of disease, because in reality, that prevents an individual from actually healing.
How so?
Well, when we look at the paradigm of what I refer to as healing versus curing, curing implies that you're going to use an intervention such as the patchwork piece, a powder, a pill, a potion, a procedure, or the elevation of some person or program in your life. It gives you the understanding that something other than you or the divine entity that's within you is doing the healing. And so the world that we live in right now is really based on convincing people that you need something outside of yourself to heal, that somehow you are so broken that the design, the construct of everything that you identify as you is deficient or decrepit, and therefore you need something else to give you that intervention, aka a cure. Whereas healing gives you the understanding that it is this innate power that is within you. You have a divine birthright. You have this ability within yourself that is actually on automatic. What many people don't realize is that every moment of the day, you are in the process of healing body, mind, heart, and spirit. In fact, that is the divine design. The divine design is for all of these various aspects of your being to work behind the scenes, to work autonomously, conspiring to keep you healthy, to keep you well, to keep you whole.
So let's back up a little bit. You said there was a coup, if you will. Uh, where did you find out about this? Where can other people look it up?
Well, you can look this up by looking into what happened when Rockefeller entered into the whole paradigm of medicine. So, Rockefeller and other tycoons decided that they want to have a way of utilizing the byproducts of their chemicals. And so they decided, this can actually work within the medical paradigm. So in the early 1900s, what happened is that these various robber barons, you can call them, would enter into the medical institutions, the medical universities, and say, you know what? Tell you what, we are going to donate millions to your university if you will allow us to be on the board. And so they created that interesting relationship, that incestuous relationship that continues to this day, where pretty much Big Pharma has a lot of influence over what happens in our medical institutions in terms of training our doctors. And most of our medical doctors are basically trained in terms of how to utilize pharmaceuticals. What many people don't realize is that your typical doctor has received less than a couple of hours in nutrition. Your typical doctor has no understanding of how to help you to heal naturally. They are very well versed, however, in how to diagnose something, meaning give it a code. And based on that code, they're going to give you a prescription, a pharmaceutical that is going to be used to manage your disease state. At no point in time do they ever give you the illusion that they're actually going to help you to heal or reverse the disease state. They'll say, you know what? Here's the medication to manage your diabetes. Here's the medication to manage your hypertension. So all of this, like I said, began in the early 1900s, where you had that marriage of your pharmaceutical companies and the medical institutions.
So the wasn't the pharmaceuticals originally based on some of the herbal remedies, and then they cut out all the cut it down to its constituent parts, took out the balance, and then started chemically reproducing it?
Well, that was prior to the early 1900s. So that was going back, as I was saying before, where your traditional doctors, people before the 1900s, they were utilizing the herbs, they were utilizing foods, they were utilizing, say, even essential oils, Bach flower remedies, homeopathy, even. And then when we enter into the early 1900s and the mid 1900s, that is when you have the introduction of pharmaceuticals in the as a byproduct of the chemicals. And so we are coming back from World War II, World War I, and they're saying, We don't have anything to use these chemicals for. And you know what? We kind of noticed that when people were exposed to these chemicals, they had XYZ quote unquote side effects. So they started to make the correlation between utilizing various chemicals and being able to force the body to do certain things. So, yes, originally, medicine came from plants, came from animals, came from our environment in the form of cell salts and things of that nature. But as we progress into what we currently understand as modern medicine, really and truly, it's based pretty much on what is concocted in a lab and has very little to do with the original herbal constituencies. And at the same time, as you said, another part of this is that they started to isolate what they would call the active ingredient of an herb and use that particular active component as, sorry, in isolation. Now, again, if we're looking at the modality of quote unquote curing, meaning forcing the body to have a certain response, forcing the body to manage a certain symptomology, then that's perfectly fine. But if you're actually looking for the process of healing, that's not fine, because the reality is that there are 50 million different components in an herb that are more in the supportive kind of role, you know. So when we look at, say, willow bark, where they were able to take the active ingredient out of that to create aspirins and things to help you with regards to pain. Yes, that active ingredient is going to help you to not feel the pain, but all the other components that were in the willow bark that the body would utilize to actually help to nourish the body, help the body to heal in a deep and more comprehensive, holistic fashion, all of that is reversed, because now the name of the game is not helping you to heal. The name of the game is resolving the symptoms or managing the symptoms.
So when did Bach create his Bach flower remedies? I thought that was in the 1900s.
Yes, but that's earlier, you know. And the other thing to keep in mind is that these people who created things like the Bach flower remedies, that created the cell salts, the tissue salts, that created the homeopathy, that type of science, that type of medicine was propagandized to be quote unquote discredited and for people to mock those types of modalities, because in comes in, as I said, the pharmaceutical companies that have their medications that have a more immediate effect on the body, and they have an effect of managing a symptom. And as I said, they have infiltrated the medical universities. And so now the people who are talking to you about the herbs, the people who are talking to you about homeopathy, they are now being kicked out of the medical institutions, and they're looked at as being quote unquote snake oil salesmen. But
Well,
now,
it's
go
time
ahead.
for us to take a station break. Dr. Gamble and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What do you mean they don't want us well? With us this hour is Dr. Michelle Gamble, the author of Creating a Happier, Healthier You. Her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. Dr. Gamble, when we talk about the system's not wanting us well, it sounds kind of like a conspiracy. Where are you getting your information on this?
Well, we're getting the information from looking at the reality of what's happening in our country right now. We are looking at spending more than $4 trillion on health, and yet we are one of the sickest nations in the world. It seems the more money that we spend on health, the worse we get. We're looking at the fact that more than 66% of us have a chronic illness. We're looking at the fact that more than 50% of our children have a chronic illness. We're looking at the fact that when you look at our children, I started teaching back in the 1990s. And when I was teaching, it was practically unheard of to have somebody in your classroom with a peanut allergy. Now, practically every kid has some form of allergy. Either they're allergic to peanuts, or they're allergic to dogs and cats, they're allergic to the 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 pollen. I've even heard now you have people who are allergic to sunshine. And so we're getting sicker and sicker and sicker, even though we're spending more and more money. And so that should tell us that something is rotten in Denmark, as Shakespeare would say.
So how do you relate the allergies that the children are starting to exhibit back to the pharmaceutical companies?
Well, we're looking at the way in which we are overactivating the immune system. We're looking at the fact that when I was a little girl, I probably had maybe at most 5 or 6 immunizations. Now, when we look at the vaccine schedule, we're talking about children at least 72 vaccines, if not, when you start counting in the COVID vaccines, it's more so like 90 something vaccines. Now, keep in mind that vaccines are based on the idea that you're going to overactivate the immune system. You're going to make the immune system now start to respond to some sort of um, infiltrator, okay, to make things simple. When you do that over time, over and over and over and over again, especially to young children, young babies that have immature immune systems. When a baby is born, a baby has a very immature immune system and therefore is dependent on the mother's immune system. However, on the first day that a baby comes into this world, a baby is given a hepatitis B vaccination. And you may ask yourself, why would you do something? Why would you introduce a hepatitis B vaccination, which is basically transferred one individual to another through sexual activity, through promiscuity, things of that nature? Or the, the one exception would be a mother who has hepatitis B. But the reality is less than 1% of mothers have a hepatitis B infection when giving birth. And those parents are automatically identified because every mother that goes into a hospital is given a test to identify whether or not she has hepatitis B. So those babies can automatically be identified and given the vaccine if that's the case. In any case, what's happening now is that we're having the overactivation of the immune system. That in combination with the fact that we have coming from big pharma, we have quote unquote food that is no longer actually food. We're looking at food that no longer has the nutritional component that we used to have in food, say 40, 50 years ago. If
Well,
we
I
look
won't
at the,
I
go
won't
ahead.
argue with you about the quality of our food and frankenfood, if you will. But how does that relate back to big pharma? You kind of lost me there.
Okay. So as I said, big pharma has to do with the medications. So one of the main medications that children receive from the very first breath of life is immunizations. And those immunizations have been compounded significantly over the past 30 years. So what has happened is that now we're basically assaulting the immune system of our children and assaulting the immune system of individuals that have an immature immune system, first and foremost. A child doesn't fully develop their immune system until about 3 to 5 years of age. But the majority of vaccines that are issued to a child are before the age of 3. And so you have a situation where you are going in and you are aggravating the immune system, you're overactivating the immune system. And when you overactivate the immune system, you're dysregulating the immune system. And so that is one aspect of how we're having the um, manifestation, so if you will, of hyperactivity of the immune system, dysregulation of the immune system. So that comes in the form of various types of allergies. It also comes in the form of various types of autoimmune conditions and several other conditions.
So where's the Food and Drug Administration in all of this?
Well, the Food and Drug Administration is in bed with big food and big pharma. A lot of times people don't realize that a lot of the people that are running these agencies are taking kickbacks from the agencies, and the kickbacks come in a variety of different forms. One of the major forms that it comes back is, you'll notice that after they leave something like the Food and Drug Administration, interestingly enough, they become part of the boards of these various pharmaceutical companies. And that is why one of the things that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has done most recently is that he completely overhauled what's called the ACIPs, the committee that would oversee whether or not to approve various immunizations. So when he went into the administration, we realized that there were a lot of interesting relationships that people were not disclosing with regards to their role as part of things like the Food Administration, Food and Drug Administration, as well as part of these various committees that will approve or disapprove various medications, and in this case, immunizations. And so because of those conflicts of interest, he fired everyone. And now we are slowly building a new committee. And hopefully, as time moves on, we'll be able to avoid these various forms of conflicts of interest. But you see this very, as I said, incestuous relationship, not only between our government and these various pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, but also between the various agencies and these various organizations, companies, and our institutions,
So
the
let's
institutions
move
that
back.
teach our doctors.
Let's move back to herbology, if that's
Mhm.
the way you say it. I It was, of course, a very
Mhm.
viable form
Yeah.
of healing back when, but today it seems like, whether for whatever reason, there people can hang their shingle as an herbologist without any training whatsoever, except self-taught. So
Mhm.
when did the regulations slip away from applying to herbs
Mhm.
and the people that would distribute them?
Well, one of the things to keep in mind is that the field of herbology is one of nature, meaning there's very little that you can do with regards to quote unquote regulating nature. If I go and I tell you, hey, go and eat an apple is food. Various herbs are foods. Now, the question becomes, as the saying goes, let the buyer beware, caveat emptor. So, in most occasions, what I tell people, as with everyone else, even with quote unquote medical doctors, I say to people, you need to do the research about the provider that you are putting your health in. Okay. I do not care about the letters behind someone's names. I don't care who calls him or herself an expert, especially today, because anyone and everyone, as you said, can quote unquote call themselves an expert. And we have people with various degrees and alphabet soup letters behind their names, in front of their names, and it's irrelevant. What's most important is for you to get validation of whether or not that person is capable. And so, what I tell people, just like I was talking to a woman this morning about an issue pertaining to mold, and she was given information that she just had a significant mold infestation in her house. And these people came in and gave her estimates and mold remediation. And she later found out that it was a scam. And so I said, did you do some research on these people? And she said, you know what, Michelle? After the fact, I went and I did research on these people. I said, and she said, I think I'm going to start doing that in the beginning, instead of going down that rabbit hole. And so the
So
same thing is true now with whether you're talking about supplements or you're talking about herbs or you're talking about these various bright, shiny objects, devices, whether it be infrared pads and magnetic pads and all of these various things. You, for better or for worse, we're in America where your responsibility is realizing that you are responsible for your health. It doesn't, and even when we talk about medical doctors, again, have you done research on the people that have all of these alphabet soup behind their names?
So you state that all people have a divine healer, and we started into talking about that. Would you go into it a little more for us, please?
Well, one of the things that I want us to remember is when we were children, I'm sure every single one of us at some point in time fell, right? And you cut yourself. And guess what? Mom or dad or auntie or uncle or somebody came along and cleaned out the wound, you know, maybe put a little band-aid on it. And then a couple days later, you pulled off the band-aid and you had healed. That is what I'm saying. Every one of us has a direct relationship to understanding what I'm saying in terms of knowing that you have within you the divine power to heal. The question always becomes, are you supporting that divine healer, or are you putting more obstructions to sabotage that divine healing? And so now we look at also whether or not we even believe that we can heal. Because remember, the messaging that we're getting everywhere, you turn on your TV and every single ad is saying, there's something wrong with you. If you're sad, there's something wrong with you. If you're mad, there's something wrong with you. If you think very quickly, there's something wrong with you. If you have a tummy ache, there's something wrong with you, and that's nature's fault. We've got to fix nature, as opposed to saying, I was created by a divine creator, and I know that this is not the desire of that creation. When you created your babies, you did not want your babies to have all kinds of malaise. When you create a car, if you were the creator of a car, you don't want the car to be breaking down. So obviously, the entity that created us did not want us to just break apart, fall apart. So what I'm
So
saying is
so
that
the
that
divine
divine healer is within.
so the divine healer, does that depends on a religious viewpoint?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So you can be Buddhist, you can be Christian, you can be Jewish, you can be atheistic. None of that matters. What matters is that you have the understanding that there's something powerful that resides in every single person. There's some type of automatic default programming that kicks in when there's something off, that says, you know what, we need to bring balance back. We need to reintegrate the different parts of our being. And that
Oh,
is
we're
always
we're
happening.
we're gonna have to reintegrate on the other side of yet another station break. Dr. Gamble and I will be right back to continue our discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission
Absolutely.
Evolution, missionevolution.org. Is there a blueprint for healing? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing alternatives to traditional medicine is Dr. Michelle Gamble. Her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. Dr. Gamble, we can't argue that medical doctors have spent a lot of time learning about the physical body.
Mhm,
And I mean, they spend a lot of time in college.
mhm,
How do you presume to be able to better understand the physical body without that level of education? And
mhm,
where do you come up with the idea that what you say is backed in fact?
mhm. Well, first and foremost, to understand again that medical doctors have significant training. I will never ever disparage what medical doctors do with regards to acute care, crisis care, and intervention. If I were to get knocked down by a Mack truck, God forbid, what I tell people is, do not take me to the local herbalist. Do not take me to the local homeopath. Take me to the nearest ER, because I recognize that is the way that I need to intervene in that moment of crisis to get my body back in alignment. Now, that is very different from understanding how there is an innate aspect of one's being that can produce healing. And this is something that ancients have understood, our grandmothers understood. And our grandmothers didn't have PhDs. Our grandmothers didn't have, years of medical school, but they knew from generations that herbs worked. That, okay, if I use this herb when my baby has a tummy ache, my baby doesn't have a tummy ache anymore. When
Well,
I use this, go ahead.
the herbs have been interfered with, like everything else growing on the planet. And it used to be that we would wildcraft herbs, and they
Mm-hmm,
would carry the balance of the season that season. And
mm-hmm,
if we're balanced with nature, then that balance was brought back around by the
mm-hmm,
herbs. I assume is a very simplistic way of putting it. However, today they're cultivated, they're grown,
mm-hmm.
they're pushed outside of their season. How can we be sure that they're still carrying the same kind of balance that they did years ago?
Well, as I was saying with the food, everything has been compromised in our world, unfortunately. So our food has been compromised, just like our herbs have been compromised. You're absolutely correct. That's why it's very important when you're sourcing for herbs to source for herbs from qualified entities that do wild crafting or that do quality control for their herbs. It's the same thing even with essential oils. There's certain essential oils that I use, and there are other essential oils that I would never use because I don't trust their potency, I don't trust their quality. So the same is true with our foods, that we have to start asking questions about where our food is coming from. Is it from an organic pasture? If I'm looking at even eggs, if I'm looking at chicken. So I have chickens here where we are located. And there's a difference between the eggs that my chickens lay versus the eggs that some of my neighbors lay, because some of my neighbors, they may get good quality grains, but that's all that their chickens are eating, grains that are manufactured and have been probably GMO and all that kind of different stuff. Whereas my chickens go out and they just roam the grass and have that better quality. So it's
So,
always a question of being aware that you have to do the investigation about everything in your life, not just the herbs, but the foods, the lotion that you put on your skin, the essential oils that you're doing, everything has to be questioned.
so while we're busy questioning, and that sounds like a lot of research, right? In the meantime, we have a lot of people here. And so
Mhm.
going out and wildcrafting the herbs we need is not necessarily an option
Oh, no.
anymore.
Mm-mm.
So we're still relying on whoever did research, and there isn't much money being put into researching herbs. There aren't very many independent studies out there on them. So where are we going to get our information?
So, interestingly enough, we don't need to do a lot of research with regards to herbs because herbs have been used not only for generations, but by practically every culture that you can think of has a history of utilizing herbs. And they have documented their use of various herbs. Now, granted, if you wanted to understand the chemical composition of echinacea, then yes, you're going to have to quote unquote do the research and go into a lab to discern the chemical compositions of echinacea. But from the standpoint of an ordinary Joe Schmucket or Smurfette, like myself, or like you, or like our daughters, our sisters, our mothers, our brothers, we don't care about the chemical composition of echinacea. We just basically want to know, does it work and what does it work at?
Well, I understand. I wasn't suggesting that we go into chemical composition.
Mhm,
My suggestion was, or my concern was,
mhm,
given that there is no more wild crafting, given that to speak of, given that our all of our food, including our herbs, has been
mhm,
compromised,
mhm,
how do and there's no research, no studies out there to speak of
mhm,
that cover herbs because there's not the money in it.
mhm.
So how do we know what herbs does do what and how well they do it at this point, given all the compromises?
Well, again, number one, what I tell people is that you want to get the best quality herbs possible to the best of your ability. Number two, we utilize good old-fashioned conversation and community and our experiences. So when I go out, for instance, as a provider, I have utilized several different types of echinacea, not only for myself, but also for my children, for the people that I work with. And I get the feedback about which brands of echinacea work best. And when I look at that feedback, I'm able to discern, this brand did not work very well. This brand worked very well, you know?
So basically, your clients are your kind of like guinea pigs, and you do your own study.
No, it's not that my clients are my guinea pigs. It's that I listen to people and I listen to their experiences. I've utilized many of these various companies on my own, and I get validation from looking at other people utilizing these things. And in actuality, that's what science is. It's about replicating a quote unquote experience. If you are able to replicate a quote unquote experience over and over again, then that's confirmation. Now, interestingly enough, we may want to talk about research, and we may talk about things like our vaccines. And what RFK is now making more people aware of is that the so-called research that has been done has not been science. There has never been vaccines that have been tested in contradiction to a placebo. And that is how you actually test whether or not a vaccine would work. So we have all of these high standards, let's say, for things like herbs, which have been used, again, for hundreds of generations in many, many different cultures. And yet we don't say the same thing about something like a novel creation of man.
So,
And the
so,
argument about whether or not it is wild crafted, granted, it will decrease.
so the let's talk about food as medicine. I've heard a lot about that. Where do we go with that? Food as medicine. Of course, we have to be careful of our food sources, and hopefully going for organic. But what do you know about that?
Well, the reality is that your first form of medicine is food, meaning that is what the body uses to nourish itself. What you're using as your food is now converted into what your body uses to restore and repair all of the various systems in our body. So if we're looking at something as simple as drinking water, which unfortunately most people are not drinking sufficient water, and then we have the whole conversation of drinking good water and not water coming from plastic bottles. But something as simple as water is very key to creating balance in the body, to creating that fluidity, to be able to help our body to detoxify efficiently. When we look at various foods, we look at our foods that are high in antioxidants. We look at our foods that are high in very good quality proteins, foods that are high in good sources of fiber, foods that are high in your antioxidants such as vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin C. These are all different nutrients that the body need. Now, I cannot say that we will ever be acetaminophen deficient, but I can say without any hesitation that there's a very real possibility that you're vitamin C deficient or you're vitamin D deficient. And if you
Which
don't,
brings me to another
Mhm,
point is empty harvest. Our soil is so stripped, even
mhm,
even when you try to go organic,
mhm,
um, and this interference with our food has gone on for generations.
mhm,
There's chemicals in it, and even if there's try to go organic, if the neighbor's growing GMO, guess what goes over across the fence?
mhm.
So, isn't our food at this point a form of the toxicity that's making us sick?
Absolutely. It is, unfortunately. And so, we're in the unfortunate position of having to do the best we can with what we have. And given that reality, unfortunately, what I tell people is that many of us will need to take supplements of various kinds. Different people need to take different supplements. Some supplements are kind of generic, meaning all of us need to take them. But you bring up a very, very good point. And I wish that we lived in another type of world. I wish we were passing on to our children a world that was better than the world that we inherited. But unfortunately, it isn't. So now we have to look at how do we optimize and make lemonade with the lemons that we're given.
The chemically infested lemons that we're given, right?
Yes. So, unfortunately, as I said, it's going to require taking charge of our lives and realizing that we have to do a variety of different things to improve the efficiency of our systems. And so sometimes that means utilizing various types of supplements. Sometimes it means being a lot stricter with your diet, not having as much leeway. So, I think many of us who are listening to this remember George Burns, right? And George Burns was notorious as being a drinker and a smoker and living to, I think it was like 100 and something. We can't get away with those things anymore. We can't get away with drinking and smoking and excessiveness to the degree that George Burns was able to get away with it. The same thing when we look at people in the older generations of our family. They said, well, I've been eating this stuff since I was a little girl and nothing ever happened to me. Well, guess what? They were of a stronger stock back then than, unfortunately, our children and our grandchildren, due to the compromised nature of our environment.
It's certainly compromised. That's a fact. And it's, you talked about supplementation, but all those aren't created equal either, are they?
Nope, not at all. You have to be very, I was talking to a young lady the other day, and she's very strapped for cash. So part of what she does is that she has Medicaid, and Medicaid has an arrangement with CVS where every month she's able to get, I think, like $50 worth of things from CVS. And she was asking me, well, Michelle, which supplements should I get from CVS to be able to, help my situation? And I said, I don't know if I would necessarily go to that source for my supplementation. And it's hard, because when you're looking at the better quality supplements,
we're going to need to take a station break. Okay. Please stay with us as Dr. Gamble and I continue to explore healthcare alternatives. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Are we naturally sick or naturally healthy? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org, or continuing our discussion with Dr. Michelle Gamble. Her website, holistichealingdoctor.com. Dr. Michelle, let's talk a little bit about community immunity.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the most inspirational messages that I can leave with you is that in the midst of all of this craziness, and it can be very depressing sometimes if you really meander into the depths of it. We say, well, our environment is toxic, our foods are toxic, our herbs are compromised, even the supplements can be toxic if you're getting them from certain sources. There's one phenomenal light at the end of the tunnel that I could share with you, which is that even when we go back in history and we look at what we refer to as the blue zones, these are the zones in our world where you have the most amount of centenarians, people who live into their hundreds. When we look and we compare these various blue zones, we notice that all of them don't eat the same food. All of them don't have the same type of temperate environment. All of them don't drink the same drinks. All of them don't engage in the same kind of physical activities. But there's one thing that is consistent across the board from one blue zone to the next, and that is community. When people gather together and support each other. And in fact, the research that comes out lets us know that if someone is in a community he or she will be much more effective at his or her health program. And I've seen this in terms of the people that I work with. When I'm working with an individual, one of the first things that I ask is, do you have someone to support you? Is there a brother, a sister, a mother, a husband, a wife, even a son, a daughter? And one of the things that I encourage people to do is to find someone, at least one person that you can say is going to be your accountability buddy, is going to be your sounding board, is going to be your cheerleader, your rah, 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 because that is what is going to help you to feed into that ability for you to heal. On a practical level, that person can either inspire you with testimonials or inspire you with motivation, or that person can say, hey, you know what? You didn't take your supplements, or you didn't eat your food, or you didn't go shopping, or you didn't go for your exercise. At the very least, that person can do that. But even more importantly, that person gives you the energetic reality that you are not alone. Loneliness has such a detrimental impact on our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our souls. You know, they've done studies, for instance, where they've had babies that were newly born, and they would provide both of the babies with the nutrients that they need. And one baby had a nurse that would hold the baby and snuggle the baby and take care of the baby and soothe the baby. And the other baby, they left to just be on his own. They actually had to stop that study because of the detrimental impact on the baby that did not have that contact with another human being. And we see that not only in studies, but you can look at the people around you. You know, we sometimes talk about our elders. And if you have a couple, if one person dies, if the husband or the wife dies, the next person will die shortly after in a lot of cases, because all of a sudden that person has lost their anchor. That person has lost the ability to be with someone that gives them the message that you are not alone. You are loved, you are supported. So, what I share with people over and over again is that community is actually your strongest immunity. Community is actually your best form of medicine. In many ways, it doesn't make a difference how much good food you take, organic food, how much phenomenal herbs you take. If you feel that you are isolated, if you feel that you are alone, if you feel that the world is against you, that acts as more of a poison than anything else. And that is why in about 2018, 2019, the British government created a new position in their government called the Minister of Loneliness. So here we have, say, for instance, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Health. In the UK, they have the ministers, you know. So they created this new position for the Minister of Loneliness because they realized even then, prior to 2020, that a significant part of their population was self-identifying as being lonely. And that was having a significant impact on their health. Therefore, they created this position in order to do the research about ways of helping to create people in communities, because they found that that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of being utterly by yourself is worse to your health than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And I encourage you guys to do the research, to look into this study that I'm talking to you about, the study with the babies, as well as what was done in the UK with the Minister of Loneliness, and then to look at what has happened through the COVID era. When the COVID debacle started, I warned people of what we now know to be the deaths of despair, because I said, when you put people in isolation, when you tell a grandmother that she can no longer be around her grandchildren, when you tell a husband that he can no longer be around his wife, When you isolate children away from their playmates, it creates a significant impact of disease and malaise.
Well, we've certainly seen that since COVID-19. So, on another topic, I understand that you're creating a sanctuary for homeless female vets and their children. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, in alignment with the understanding that community is so important, I am one of the directors of It Takes a Village Ministry, and our mission is to create natural healing communities across the globe. And so we encourage people to self-identify and say, you know what, I want to create a community in my local area. And so this is an extension of our mission. What we have come to realize is that there's a significant number of our female veterans that have children that unfortunately have gotten into the situation of being homeless or having that insecurity with regards to housing. What we are looking to do is to create a sanctuary that will help our veterans to heal, not only from things like PTSD, and unfortunately, a lot of our female veterans are also dealing with sexual trauma, but more importantly, to help them to not pass on the detrimental aspects of that trauma to their children. We're going to be doing in this sanctuary, it is actually going to be a 12-month vocational residency program that is going to help these women to come together to support each other as women and as mothers, and to learn a vocational skill to become more savvy with regards to entrepreneurship, financial management, and to become more self-sufficient. So at the end of that 12-month period, they're able to go off on their own and to become and maintain their self-sufficiency.
I understand it's a nonprofit. Is that correct?
Yes, It Takes a Village Ministry is a nonprofit organization, and the sanctuary is going to be the Roots and Resilience Sanctuary.
Well, on another note, um, are your services covered by, in Canada, the government, or in the U.S., private insurance?
No, no, not at all.
Not at all. So do you have a sliding scale for people? What do you charge?
Yes, we actually have a very innovative membership program because, again, we want to emphasize community. And what I say to people is that Michelle does not have all the answers. In fact, you are very intelligent and capable. I have learned so much from the people that I've worked with. And so we have various levels of membership that allows people to interact with us at a very minimal price point.
Who's us?
Say it again.
I said, who is us? You said
Oh,
we
our
and us.
team. Yeah, so
Okay.
there are lots of people in our team. So we have our foundational healthcare providers, such as Dr. Tom Lewis and myself. We also have other providers, and then we have a homeopath. Actually, we have two homeopaths. We have someone who specializes in essential oils, someone who specializes in body mastery, posture alignment, and those types of things. And we also have what we refer to as health stewards, what other people know as health coaches, but we take it one step further because one of their missions is to empower people to have mastery of this information and to be able to share it in their communities and with their loved ones.
So um, let's move on. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, Dr. Gamble, what is your mission?
My mission is to help people to actualize love, living optimally with vitality and elation, to create the relationships within yourself, within your own person, whether it be the relationship between your hormonal system and your digestive system and your autonomic system, and to create the relationships in your community that help you to live optimally with vitality and elation.
When did we lose relationships? When did we lose community? It's been a while, I think.
Yeah, it's been a while. And it's very sad to see our nation in this particular passage of time where we are seeing our neighbors as our enemies. And unfortunately, I guess it's just a part of our development that we have to go through these passages of darkness And that's why I encourage people to be the light, to be the person in your community that reaches out. You know, I recently moved to the country, and for the first time in my life, I made it my mission to go out and meet all my neighbors. I have never before made any attempt to interact with my neighbors, but I came here and I said, you know what? I've got to do something differently. I've got to have that recognition that I cannot be by myself. We were not designed to be an island. We were not designed to be in isolation. And so I said, in order for me to be able to preach this message of community, I have to live it. I can't tell other people to go out there and be part of community and I'm not. And so I did that and it was the best thing ever. Now I can walk out my door and I can literally say hi to everybody that I meet. And I have this sense of peace, knowing that I'm not alone, knowing that if anything happens, I can run next door and there'll be someone there that I know and that I know will help me.
Oh, that's a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Dr. Gamble, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me here as a guest.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. Michelle Gamble, the author of Mommy, Birthing the Goddess for Our Children's Sake, and Creating a Happier, Healthier You. To find out more about Dr. Gamble, where you can find her books and all she has to offer, visit her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please, be sure to join us again right here on the X-Zone TV channel, xztv.ca, where this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.